It's 11:11. Make a wish.
Welcome to Hacking Hypermobility Podcast.
I'm Luna.
And I'm Shelli.
And we're two Bendy mamas.
Hacking Hypermobility.
Greetings and salutations, and welcome back to Hacking Hypermobility, the podcast where we dive into the fascinating, frustrating world of hypermobility disorders and all of the related conditions.
We're Shelli and Luna, your hosts, here to guide you through all the latest medical breakthroughs, research updates, and community stories. And as always, we have Tiffany behind the scenes keeping us on track.
Somebody has to, and trust me, today's episode is stacked. It's a big one. We're talking about the heads, gene discovery, new research in neurodivergence, long COVID, and so much more. But before we kick off season 3, we want to tell our listeners that today is a special day. Not only is it International Zebra Day, but it's a special anniversary for the show. So let's get into it.
Yes, and it's also my baby Zebra's birthday. Happy birthday, Evelyn.
Happy birthday, Evelyn.
Yay. So we'll start with the big news in genetics advancements. So the researchers at MUSC, led by Dr. Chip Norris, have identified a potential genetic marker for hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or HEDS. It's the KLK15 gene.
This is groundbreaking. KLK15 plays a role in connective tissue health. And while it's the preprint stage, the study brings it closer to a definitive genetic test for HEDS. And there was also a Tulane paper on folate metabolism, which as of publication still has not been peer reviewed. That's the one that that's the myth for one, yeah.
Yeah, it's the MTHFR. I said it right.
You did.
Additionally, that publication has questionable conflicts of interest based on the clinic's financial connections with a large supplement distributor. So we're not even going to give it any further airtime other than just a little warning to evaluate sources.
A collaborative effort in Europe is offering hope for diagnosing rare diseases using a structured approach to diagnosing and potentially treating rare diseases with genetic reanalysis. When published, over 500 patients in Europe had received a diagnosis.
So this framework came about through the European Rare Disease Research Alliance, or ERDERA, a new rare diseases partnership coordinated by INSERM in France with over 180 organizations in Europe, including key scientists involved from Solve RD.
It would be exciting to see something like this in the U.S. This project has been led by researchers from the University of Tübingen, Radboud University Medical Center, and the National Center for Genomic Analysis in Barcelona. We are also seeing more research on the overlap between HEDS and neurodivergence. A recent study found that up to 60% of autistic individuals show signs of hypermobility.
And that's a lot. And let's not forget ADHD. There is a strong link between connective tissue disorders and executive dysfunction, which can complicate daily management of these conditions. We've talked about this connection between the inherited connective tissue disorders and neurodivergence quite extensively on the show if you want to check out some other episodes also.
And for women, masking behaviors often delay diagnosis of ADHD, autism, or HEDS, leaving comorbid conditions like POTS or mast cell activation syndrome untreated.
Yes, especially because they are misdiagnosed as mental health disorders.
Ask me how I know that one.
So, is this play about us?
It's totally about us.
Are we the problem? Me. Hi. Okay, anyhow. So a study out of the UK recently highlighted ADHD higher prevalence of hypermobility in people with autism and ADHD. Researchers are hypothesizing that these conditions might share genetic and developmental pathways.
So we're not just wired differently, we're stretched differently too.
Something like that. And I've talked extensively about the connectome theory, which came out of Italy initially, the RCTX theory out of the US. A lot of people in the community have had this theory for quite a while, but more and more of the research is showing there really is a connection. And it might just explain why sensory issues, chronic pain, and dysautonomia are so common in both groups. And understanding this overlap could lead to better care strategies, especially for our kids.
That's crucial. If you are neurodivergent, parenting neurodivergent, hypermobile kids, we see you. All three of us are in various stages of that. And we're here to help. Pause 1 second. Ladies, the door opening and closing, I can hear that. I stop in the middle of what I'm saying half the time. Whatever. It's like that video where it's like, oh my God, please don't touch anything. And like flopping around. It's the same thing. It's like, hey, I really need
I feel like this is a really good example of demand avoidance.
This is a really good example of the hellscape that is neurodivergent parenting, neurodivergent. Oh, I'm struggling with this very hard right now.
Can't focus right now. Yes, I know.
Oh, is he our president now?
Is it a fish?
I watched it. It's 12:23.
Facebook official.
Can't believe it. Can't. Stop opening and closing the doors, please. You and your sister. I don't care who's doing it. Every time I hear it click, 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 and this thing picks up. Thank you. Don't make me get in the car and drive however many hours and not corporal punish you.
Why do we gotta play with doors?
Because it's fun. Because there's a hanging sign on the door. So every time it closes, not only do you hear the click of the door, but you also hear the...
Not gonna lie, I would probably play with that too.
What sensory need do they have that needs to be met with that? So again, those of us with kids, you may have noticed since the pandemic and COVID that they're not quite the same. And so with that, long COVID continues to dominate headlines. And guess what? There's a confirmed connection between long COVID, ME, CFS, and hypermobility spectrum disorders.
I just want to point out, this is another pattern that I saw and shared about on TikTok 5 years ago. It's so, I don't know what the word is.
Annoying?
No, I'm not annoyed by it.
I am.
It's validating. I'm so appreciative that the medical researchers have caught up to the community once again. Because really, 5 years, I know doesn't seem rapid, but it really is in terms of medical research. Studies are showing now that mast cell activation happening in long COVID mirrors what we see in heads, leading to hyperinflammation and connective tissue damage.
And that is crucial because it validates what so many patients have been reporting for years.
And that's why I think listening to patients and having a community where patients can come together to discuss their conditions and get support is very important. And advocacy hit new highs in 2024. The Ehlers-Danlos Society released the very first guideline for clinical care. It's for managing childbearing in HEDS patients, helping patients navigate pregnancy risks like aortic damage and joint instability. So let me just point out what I mean by this was the first clinical guideline published. So clinicians, providers like doctors, nurse practitioners, surgeons treating patients sometimes have like an algorithm or standard protocol for treating particular conditions. So Obstetric now has a guideline written specifically for HEDS patients. And this is really big news. It's the first of its kind for our patient population.
And if you are interested, you can go back in season 2 and listen to our patient advocate episodes because Megan, who we spoke with at length, is one of the authors on that paper. So go check that out. And speaking of Megan, how did I meet her? Social media. Social media plays a huge role in spreading awareness. That's how the three of us met. But it's also a double-edged sword. A recent study in Rheumatology Advances in Practice warns against the spread of misinformation, which is a very big concern right now. And speaking of social media, Katie Ledecky, an Olympic swimmer, opened up about her POTS diagnosis. inspiring countless others to share their stories.
And speaking of social media, you mentioned how we all met. We all met on the TikTok application. And today is actually, or when this is published, will be an anniversary of
2 different videos
of kind of one of those moments between Shelli and I. And so while the TikTok ban, if that's what you want to call it, obviously affects a much larger group than this little community, affecting the loss of community and groups well beyond just the disability community. It affects small businesses, et cetera. And it affects segments of our global society in different ways. But we just wanted to take a moment to mention the changing landscape of social media as it relates to our narrow community, the zebras, the neurodivergent people. And I'll let Shelli talk about this because she articulated really well to me yesterday about how we kind of saw it coming. But for me, I think the most important thing that I want to talk about in this little segment about community advocacy and awareness is we are potentially losing what we call third space, or a gathering place outside of our homes and works. The chronic illness, the disabled community has never really had that. Disability in the United States in particular really came after civil rights in ways, if you're not aware, until my lifetime, it was illegal to be disabled in public. And there were crazy rules and laws and a lack of rights. But also, aside from just the civil rights aspect of it, disabled people weren't necessarily given the gift of diagnosis, support, management, or community. Very few of us have met other people with our rare condition. So to have a huge community, thousands and thousands of people across the globe that understand your neurodivergence, who understand your health concerns, who understand and relate to the genetic component causing literal generational trauma, it's something humanity has never experienced before. And one of the amazing things about us being neurodivergent is we see the patterns. We've talked about it. Shelli, when did you start seeing differences?
I would say shortly after we launched the podcast, probably about 2 years ago. I would say easily.
Yeah.
Maybe even I noticed that my content that was super specific, that normally drove in tons of likes, tons of comments of people saying, "Oh my gosh, me too. Wow, I didn't know that." Those videos used to get so much attention and promoted, actually kept me there to build community. Over the last 2 years, I noticed that instead of people being excited to find content that I created organically, I was forced to chase after what they were saying I needed to do in order to get people to see me.
Right.
And that
I realized I had to start censoring myself in certain words.
censoring words, looking to see, well, how do I have to act for people to, that to me right there was let me go see how I need to not be myself to get people, or let me say something quasi-controversial and potentially invite chaos to the page that I don't want to bring to my page. So that's the way
it goes back to that study about misinformation. And I think a lot of bigger chronic illness creators created some level of chaos or leaving things open to interpretation in order to get views.
Correct. And so it made me, I found that I was still spending time on the app, but I wasn't actually doing what my goal was. I ended up sucked into something else that wasn't my original purpose.
It became very difficult for us to find our community, whereas earlier on, it was miraculous how easy it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like there was a particular shift as the algorithm changed. And then as we got closer to them adding TikTok Shop, or commercialization of TikTok videos for ads, I noticed a very big shift. And that was more this past year.
I don't know if you notice this on your videos, but would you also often see things at the bottom of your video saying
Trying
things
to get me to buy.
Right. Or it's like, I almost felt like if I had spent a few dollars, they would have like thrown me a bone. And
Yeah, I think they set up a gate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely think they did.
And I think that's what's problematic about that is so many of us in this community find that behavior gross and we don't want to do it.
Right.
But
Right.
also know
because we have this, sense of justice. We want to do the right thing. We want to serve our community. We want to find good information. Also, TikTok has had pretty strict community guidelines, but sometimes they don't seem to be applied equally across the board. But one of the interesting guideline changes was when they classified autism spectrum disorder as mental health. And so for a while, if you search autism, you would get TikTok videos from creators. Now and I can't remember when it's been probably at least 2 years. Now, if you search autism, you get a pop-up that
asking if you're
directs you to mental health resources. So that leads me to believe, I had seen the pattern that any time I mentioned being autistic or used an autistic tag, I was suppressed.
Yeah.
So that's why some people stopped using captions, which is like to the detriment of our community. And I made the decision that I would still use captions. And I think that has not helped me.
Right. I even at one point I stopped using the euphemisms and just leaving the words because I was like, it doesn't matter. It's going to get suppressed anyway.
But despite all of those challenges and changes, we still had a very viable and big community.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, this is a community among many communities that humanity has never created before. That's why I think talking about the changes in social media is important to discuss community advocacy and awareness. And then particularly something that was brought to my attention, we're recording this the weekend of the TikTok Go Dark. Today we are recording on Monday, January 20th, and it is both MLK Jr. Day and the inauguration of 47. It's not lost on us.
It's 12:47 p.m. right now. Oh, just turned. That was weird.
So it's not lost on us, what all this means. And I think there's much more to this than we as a community have even, So I experienced a feeling of grief because I thought there's not enough time for me to find an effective way to connect with our community. There's so many of them. I don't have an effective way to stay connected or to back up all of our content. I was very thankful that they removed the watermark so we could back up our content. But I think it's really important that we talk about, one, like if you are really invested in this part of our community, touch base with us on our website, hackinghypermobility.com. Make sure you find us there. But also, when I was in this deep, deep grief about, I can't believe I've lost my support community, I have someone close to me in life set me straight and reminded me people of color in this country have been through much worse, have lost entire systems of support, communication, and community organization, and have rebuilt time and time again. So I think it's really important for people like us to rely on the people who have been very effective at community organizing. And so I think personally, one of the things that I've been focusing on is finding people in my real life, building my community stronger here where I am in Nashville. The TikTok community and the Zebra Herd is very important to me. I've been putting my creative efforts and my social efforts in other places within my child's community with her school. I think it's important we step back from our own personal attachment to the pain of like the initial shock and like trauma response, and know that this community is so powerful. It's not going to be lost. What we've built, what we've made, and not just our community, but at all of these communities, capitalization cannot ruin that.
From an anthropological perspective, like this makes me want to like go back to my undergrad days, find some of my old work, and just when there were big shifts in social, like I know people don't always, I think the toothpaste is out of the tube as far as we can't unknow what we've learned. We are going to have to figure out ways to keep the community going, you said. But like, I think that's something big that was on the horizon we felt. I don't think we're done with it, but it's almost like Rosetta Stone. Like we found a way to talk to our people, but then they don't want us to have access to. Sorry, I smoked some weed earlier.
Hey, we need to do an episode on that.
Oh, we will.
So our next segment,
Yeah,
we're going to talk about more of the medical research.
All right. Okay. Speaking of other things related to having this condition and all of its friends, another big topic is the financial burden of living with HEDS. A U.S. study found that EDS patients face exorbitant healthcare costs, especially for our comorbidities like autonomic dysfunction and gastrointestinal issues.
And yes, we all know on a very personal basis how difficult this condition is financially. I was talking to one of our mutual friends. He happens to be a male zebra, and he was doing the math of like the costs he needs for his feeding and how much he would need to make, like what job he would need. And he was like, it's forced poverty. And, that's kind of the landscape of disability that we struggle with on a very daily basis that I think people don't really understand. So I was very thankful to see that published in print. There was also another study that was very interesting. I want to talk about the pain phenotype study. So it highlighted variability and how HEDS affects people. So that patient needs help feeding. None of us, thank gosh, experience that because it is so expensive. Some patients experience severe pain during minor activities while others may not. And the findings actually suggest that we may need some potential revisions to the diagnostic criteria and emphasize the need for a comprehensive approach for multidisciplinary care in managing HEDS. And it definitely validated our community's criticism of using the Beighton score because it's really not reliable at predicting the severity of comorbidities. In other words, the key points where we test people for joint hypermobility does not indicate the severity of your full healthcare needs.
As a side note, and we'll get into this later, I'm glad you mentioned that because I had my disability doctor appointment and we talked about all of my conditions. And what we arrived at the end of that visit was that my autonomic dysfunction is far more disabling than my bendiness.
I would agree with that personally. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's my problem as an adult.
Well, and for pediatric patients, there's increasing evidence that HEDS can lead to aortic damage and autonomic dysfunction, emphasizing the need for early intervention.
Dang. Okay. And then
It's good news.
Yeah.
There was a lot of great news that came out with some case studies and research studies on innovations with surgical interventions with us.
surgical interventions. Well, let me see. I know a little bit about that. So surgeons and certain patients, yours truly, are seeing success with procedures like arthroscopic stabilization for shoulder instability. Now, this article, I actually read this article completely because I usually skim, but I just had 3 surgeries. They did not mention the hip in that article at all. Every other joint, I was like, really?
Everything else.
Anyway, but that's good news because my other ones aren't great either. But the procedures with the arthroscopic stabilization, like the shoulder instability in EDS patients, that study is finding high satisfaction rates among patients who elected to undergo these surgeries, yours truly included.
And we are so thankful that your hip surgery went well. And because this is something I personally have the same condition I've put off for years, and it's my biggest joint problem. So I think it's important that you share your successes and our listeners hear this so that we can share the encouragement and hope, and maybe more of us will take advantage of these interventions now that we know in the literature that it's medically evidence-backed that it's successful. There's also really exciting news on the diagnostic front. So researchers are exploring the use of what's called fibronectin protein fragments as biomarkers for HEDS and HSD. So maybe soon we will be able to do a simple lab draw to diagnose.
And also, we need to mention the mouse model study that offers potential insights into wound healing therapies for EDS.
There's been so many developments, but one of the most important things is actually like applying what medical research is learning and what clinicians are learning in how to treat and manage us as patients.
Yes, please come over here. Stand by. My college youngest, who does not generally do hugs, is asking for hugs.
Okay. That's a take advantage.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stretch. Get the love.
Thank you. Oh, good luck this semester. I'll see you again.
Have a safe trip back, please.
Ladies, do you want to go say hi to Tiffany and
Hello.
I can't see any. Oh, okay.
Bye. Enjoy. Make me beautiful art.
So, in July of 2024, the Hacking Hypermobility podcast attended the global conference for the Ehlers-Danlos Society that was in Philadelphia. And the theme was EDS from head to toe. And it covered it all, literally, from jaw pain and altered breathing patterns to urinary tract issues, brain drainage problems, HEDS patients, all of these things were covered. It was great.
We had a great time, mostly at the conference. Overall, it was a really good experience, even if it was very overwhelming for us. But it was nice to have our behind-the-scenes staff there helping us. Otherwise, I don't think we could have made it. So I don't think we've done this before, but I want to call out and say thank you to the Bendy Batty Sugar Daddy.
I will tell him that.
To the conference, make it through the conference and all of that.
And deal with during all of that.
We had an amazing producer who helped network. We met so many amazing people, and
Y'all did. I was in the room. I lived in the room that whole time, pretty much, which sucked. But y'all did awesome. I'm so proud of y'all for going out there.
it was an experience. But I will say the thing that I brought back from the conference wasn't related to me or the show. It was definitely my daughter's experience with the camp. And so if you're not familiar with that, they do partner with a camp to bring together HEDS kids and EDS kids. And she did the camp while we were in the conference and had an amazing experience. They did speak to some of the same panelists that we met. They came and did practices with them and that sort of thing. And they did some learning activities, social activities. But the best thing that we brought back from the conference was by far the friendships. My daughter still talks regularly on FaceTime to a group of these kids. I don't let her on social media, so she doesn't have this experience where we do. I had considered doing the camp before, but like the summer camp, I thought it would be too overwhelming of an environment. So now we might consider that. But I just want to make sure people were aware this resource was out there because generally it's funded. And it is invaluable for a kid to have a friend that they don't have to explain their health issues, their mental struggles, their family struggles that go along with neurodivergence and HEDS. And every time I catch them talking and say hi to one of them, and now we have like connections through the moms, the struggles that we had at the conference kind of are outweighed by this little community that was given to my daughter. So I will forever be thankful that our podcast managed to put together the funds and the time and the abilities to go. It was one of the best experiences I've had in my life. Thank you. On that note, there's been lots of research too that we learned about in in the conference that we didn't necessarily know about or really quite understand in practical application detail. One of the first viral videos I made was about my esophagus.
I remember that one.
Because I, like overly stretchy trachea. But as a reminder, kids, we don't do party tricks. But I just found that funny because one standout case study reported visible stretch marks in the esophagus could be used as a potential diagnostic marker for hypermobility. So, we all are worried about, well, when can I get genetically tested? Let me just say, I'm okay if we never have a genetic test because that is expensive and not necessarily accessible. I would love for us to know all of the genes. But in the meantime, let's improve our diagnostics. And a lot of it is clinical assessment. And some of them are very obvious that aren't on the criteria right now. And I laughed that if your doctor could just say, and look down your throat and see that you have these telltale stretch marks down your throat, then maybe you could get a diagnosis.
Why is it the throat one? Why is it the throat?
I don't know.
Why isn't it somewhere else?
You laugh.
I mean, that's hilarious, but also but what about me? I gag. I have a super strong gag reflex. There's no way anything is
I will say my child's biggest and earliest sign was she would call it squeezy neck. And I think it's both neurological and allergic related. But I think a lot of our early symptoms are related to this area, like neck, head, jaw.
I mean, yeah, I had my tonsils out when I was 3. So yeah. It's just funny to me. That's all, that it's that.
But we learned so many great things. One of the best experiences I had was I did the yoga every morning with Jeannie DeBon, and then we did some breathwork exercises, and it was a great experience. I learned some new approaches, and it really helped me understand my pain. And I've already been doing breathwork practice and very somatic exercises, which I find invaluable. But learning from the people on the forefront of the research was amazing.
Absolutely. And don't forget about other creative interventions, like Luna just said, breath work, creatine supplements, and psychological therapies have all shown some promise for managing fatigue and improving just general quality of life.
Do you know how we laugh at certain social media posts where someone posts about a health issue and then asks, is this related to my EDS? And I just want to be like, no, Deborah, your paper cut is not because you have EDS. But sometimes it is. That's things that you wouldn't think. Okay. I was going to say a stub toe. And I was like, no, I can connect it to EDS because we all have poor proprioception. And so I bet if we did a study on do EDSers stub their toes more frequently than other people, I bet we would. But that's ridiculous. All right. Come on. But it is a very commonly held belief in the community that it's all connected. And it really does seem to be accurate.
It's the one thing that's
Let's not go crazy with it. So this is in terms of population size of any of the research studies we looked at in the last retrospective of this 2024 year, this is the largest study that we're referencing. So this very large study looked into healthcare insurance database, so insurance claims, and it shows that patients with HEDS and HSD have a higher prevalence of multi-system diagnoses than peers.
So from this study, within 2 years following HEDS or HMS, which is the study calls hypermobility syndrome diagnosis, digestive disorders were the most prevalent diagnosis, followed by cardiovascular conditions.
And so this study basically says what we've all been saying. You're not just a zebra, you're a whole dang zoo.
I just thought of something.
Yeah.
That is one of the biggest, because that was pulled from insurance, right? So when you get the question from people about why bother getting diagnosed because there's no cure, whatever, that to me is a big one. Why? Because if you're diagnosed, that study just pulled from that, correct?
Right. So it's pulling diagnosis codes and all the procedural codes, all the codes they use for insurance billing. Yes. If you get diagnosed, if you get treatment and care, you will show up in these databases where we get information to manage healthcare on a large scale
That's something I didn't even think
statistical
about.
analysis research.
That's what it just popped up. Sorry to interrupt. I was just like, wait a minute. That's
No, but that's really
why
though,
I
because
know.
you don't have that diagnosis. All they're going to see is like digestive unresolved, unknown digestive. I wonder how many unresolved digestive disorder if they did like a
If
retrospective.
they went back to IBS patients. Yeah. Yeah, we in season 1 we talked about the diagnostic odyssey. And before we did that, we talked about, well, why even get diagnosed? And we said, because you can contribute to the advancement of medical research. This is a very good example of why. And I'm going to just quote directly from the study what they found. So there's going to be some stats, and it's a little bit wordy, but stay with me. So digestive orders occurred in 54.5% of patients with heads, over half, and 41.6% of patients with HMS, compared with, in the general population, only 28.5%. Big difference. You have vascular disorders, and it doesn't break down any of these disorders, it's just an umbrella term, occurred in 43.6% of patients with heads and 21.8% of patients with HMS, compared to only 10% in the general population. Anxiety, respiratory disorders, and developmental disorders occurred in approximately a quarter of the heads group and 20% of the HMS group, compared to less than 15% of the general population. All these are significantly statistically higher in the heads and hypermobility spectrum disorder group. So this study highlights that multi-system diagnoses within the pediatric heads and hypermobility syndrome populations as well. Heads patients had higher rates of multi-system diagnoses compared to hypermobile syndrome patients, though. So there is like a difference in presentation in terms of severity with these other conditions. These results suggest a high multi-system disease burden for young heads and HMS patients. Future research is needed to understand the timing and presentation of clinical symptoms for this population. Okay, that's the end of the quote. I did interject some there. But as a side note, so I was reading this and I'm thinking aloud also, this is pulling from an insurance database. These are the patients that went and sought care. I've talked to so many people who don't.
And who have insurance.
Had insurance, who could pay for care. Or sort of. I actually, so this weekend, Saturday, I went and used my Christmas present gift and I got a massage and it was amazing. The masseuse was amazing. But the funniest part was, like, you say like a little like info sheet about your health issues or what you want to work on while you're there for the massage. And so I said, you know what hypermobility is? You know what EDS is? She was like, oh yeah, I have it. I'm like, okay, great. And so I kind of talked to her a little bit about like, how did you find out? How long you know? Like, just saying, your family, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, well, I don't really like doctors. I don't really go get care. And so, and she obviously manages, she's doing okay. She's professional. She gave an amazing massage. And she's just hypermobility disorder. She has never been genetically tested or anything like that and hasn't pursued it. But it made me think there's so many people not in this pool because of the access to care in our American healthcare system, and participating in insurance and all of that is difficult because of the financial burdens we discussed and other reasons. So I found that very interesting.
Can I just note that by large study, I just want to point out that the data came from 19,790 heads patients, 17,509 HMS patients, and 4,959,713 patients from the general population that were analyzed for this study.
Wow, that's huge. So I think that is very good movement in medical research to look at our care and examine this as a multi-system disorder, and maybe we can start taking better care approaches. And this just ties right back into disability rights. So I want to change topics now. And we're going to talk about some updates in that space. In the disability rights news, the push for better accessibility in healthcare has continued to gain momentum. The National Council on Disability here in the U.S. recently released a report calling for standardized training for doctors on how to accommodate patients with complex chronic conditions. I do think they're listening.
So they're not just going to keep saying, oh, lose some weight, take some Tylenol, go for a run.
Exactly. They're also advocating for better insurance coverage for things like mobility aids and interventional treatments like physical therapy.
Yeah, because nothing says we care about your quality of life like refusing to pay for a wheelchair that you so desperately need.
I know we're keeping this brief, but like you said that sentence, a doctor prescribes it. And then some schmo it's sitting in an office who has not evaluated you or knows anything about you or has any kind of medical training is like, I don't think that doctor knows what he's talking about. Nope.
Is it a schmo or is it the AI just saying, nope?
No, it's probably that too. Yeah, and they got in
It
trouble.
was a schmo until it became the AI.
Yeah.
The schmo, the AI.
And they schmo wrote that AI with the intention of reducing their burden of care.
Of raising their bottom line.
Yes. Also, like, same funny, not funny, haha, but strange conundrum. So you mean to tell me that my doctor writes a, like, prescription, like an order, like signed,
A board certified
yeah,
physician.
yeah, and like a specialist, like in their field, says X patient needs XYZ, and then your insurance says, oh, well, we have to do this thing called a prior authorization, and so they submit it, and then they deny it, and then the doctor has to waste their time appealing it for months repeatedly until the end of the plan year, and then they're like, on the last day, sure, we'll cover it. And then you fire that insurance company, you get a new insurance company, and you find one that isn't playing these games, and you finally get the Botox injections, and they submit it to your new insurance, and they approve it the same day. I'm sorry, was that was real
Too
life?
specific or?
A little specific.
I was just amazed when, I don't know what happened at what point, but like, or if I've always had this coverage and I didn't realize it, but I can go to as much PT as I want.
That's nice.
But that adds up too with copays. So I balance it with PT and a Pilates membership because I can go to, that spreads out, like it helps. But anyway, that's not where, but yeah,
But the point is,
that's screwed up.
you know, we're fighting for our care. It's exhausting. The burden of fighting for our care also falls on our healthcare providers. So of course they're exhausted and not providing the best care because they're putting their attention with insurance companies instead of their patients.
And they're also getting bombarded with people like us who are like, fucking, I know what the this is. Just tell me.
And we pay for the privilege of having health insurance that then refuses to cover anything. And then we have to pay copays and deductibles and all that. But healthcare reform is needed on so many levels, but particularly healthcare insurance reform in the United States is needed. And I'm not going to touch on that news, but it's been in the news. So I think it's important that we talk about some happy spots in the community too.
Yes. So before we wrap up all of this, we're going to, like Luna said, put a spotlight on the community news, and the Ehlers-Danlos Society is hosting a virtual global summit next month. That's February. Will include managing pain, navigating relationships, and advocating for yourself in healthcare settings. It's in New Zealand, so us stateside people are going to be a virtual.
We're going to have to figure out how to participate. I'll probably just be listening the next time. I really like the agenda. It sounds very helpful. And for our Bendy and neurodivergent friends, there's a new app called NeuroTribe Connect. I've not tried it yet. I'm curious to hear from listeners if you've tried it. It's designed to help people with autism and ADHD find local support groups and events. And like I said, it's time for you to build your local community. So apparently it's like Bumble, but for finding your own group of neurodivergent friends.
Bumble, is that
It's a
swipe
dating
left
app.
thing? I don't.
Yeah.
As long as I can't teeth with these apps.
Sure.
It's also worth mentioning that several disability advocacy groups are going to be organizing a rally for healthcare reform in Washington, D.C. later this year. And if you can't attend, they are offering virtual participation options.
Okay, this person in Maryland might need to be looking.
I think we should look into that.
Yeah.
This person in Virginia might also be interested.
So kind of related, but unrelated. I saw a really interesting TikTok today that said the march is not the protest. The protest is the action that came after the march. So community organizing is great, but what are you actually doing? Like, what are you doing to affect change? That's really
that's
good
like
example
planning
of
a wedding, but not actually thinking about a marriage.
right. Yeah, yeah. Walk down the aisle, all pretty and cute. It's great, but then like, what happens after you say those vows? Are you even saying the vows? Yeah. So it's about action. It's not about words. It's a great reminder, and I think that's a great place to end the episode today.
Yeah, I think you're right. So that wraps up our massive update from 2024 in this first month of 2025. From genetic discoveries to patient stories, it's clear that the conversation around hypermobility is evolving and very quickly.
A lot more quickly than what it did before. So I'm very thankful. And if you want to learn more, check out the show notes for links to all the studies we referenced. We really glossed over a lot. We did not do deep dives on these and the guidelines that we've mentioned and that sort of thing.
And as always, we do want to hear from you. We love it. Share your stories, questions, or if you have any topic suggestions or requests, you can do that on social media, any of the social media platforms, and through our website, hackinghypermobility.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hacking Hypermobility podcast. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us on Spotify or YouTube. Leave us a review or a comment and share this episode with your fellow Bendy besties.
And don't forget to hydrate.
Yeah, do you want to hydrate? Let's see. Okay, are we done?
That's it. That was the end.